Today on AI Actually, the decade of the agent, enterprise AI reality, and why waiting will cost you.
A language model inherently knows nothing about your business except what it was originally trained on the internet.
People are going to hold back with the stuff that is working really well, and we're going to read about all the failures.
Sure. Wait for a while and see how that works out for you. I think that's potentially the best way to go out of business is just ignore what's going on around you and assume nothing is changing.
Welcome to, I think we're up to episode 8 now of the AI Actually podcast.
Woo!
And we've got core gang here, Alon Goren, founder and fearless leader, Jim Johnson, who runs our services organization, and Mike Finley, who basically it helps us figure out how to navigate the AI space and sort of conquer LLMs for the enterprise. And I'm Pete Reilly, I'm playing host for today. And, as we try to stay on top of what's going on in the news, and a lot of what we're seeing in the news is folks are calling for the AI bubble and so on. And Andrej Karpathy, who has worked for OpenAI, he's worked for Tesla, pretty famously was on a podcast this week saying, a lot of folks are calling it the year of the agent, 2025. But really, he was saying, hey, it's a lot more like the decade of the agent. And so we thought that might be an interesting kickoff topic. And so with that, I thought I'd just sort of kick it out to you guys and get your perspective on that. Alon, I know you have a unique perspective on that. Sure, want to react to that.
Well, first, I'll say this. I mean, he's one of the brightest minds, I think, in AI for starters. So respect.
We all agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you follow him, if you follow kind of his career, and just very, both hands-on and smart, and can apply these concepts and explain it, right? Like his passion is actually education, teaching people. So a ton of respect for him. I think just to kind of summarize some of the salient points from the interview, and it's been almost a week, or has been a week. I can't remember.
About a week.
I think, he made lots of points, but the point that a lot of people are picking on is sort of like AI is not all the way there to build agents. It's not all the way there to do novel research, or to, in the coding world, to take over as the thing that writes a lot of the code. And I'd say for me, the biggest, I would say, gap in what he described and what I experience is, I think in the coding world, if you look at the vast majority, certainly enterprise applications, you're not trying to build an out of distribution solution, something that's novel. You're building something that's, to a large degree, follows a blueprint that's been around and honed over years, right? And blueprint in a big sense of architecture. And then there's lots of techniques and packages and technologies that evolve. But when we write enterprise software, it's amazing how well attuned the latest models are to the code that you're trying to write. So where Karpathy describes, his frustration with he was building NanoChat, and which is distilling the essence of how to build a language model that follows instructions. And to distill the essence of it, right, he was unable to leverage AI assistants to do that really well, because they mostly want to write boilerplates, follow a well-known pattern, be overly helpful in places where he didn't want to be helpful. So wasn't a great tool for the job. But for the jobs that we see, it's exactly what we want in many cases. It's exactly like, don't invent yet a new way to think of how to do CRUD operations or analytics or automate workflows, right? Those are patterns that the language model has learned by reading a ton of code, among other things, right? And that boring is great. It's it's exactly what we need in many of the enterprise cases. So I would say my biggest sort of contradiction to his punchline is the technology as it exists today, we're actively using it and seeing huge productivity boosts and an ability to crank out features that are immediately usable by enterprise, as opposed to waiting for AI to get better before it really takes over much of the percent of the work that is being done in coding.
Jim, what was your takeaway?
I think mine is maybe A little bit simpler point of view. If your definition of an agent is I'm going to have a fully functioning employee that's going to I'm going to reliably go have them do everything an employee does today, yeah, we're miles and miles away from that. But if your definition is we want to get valuable work done in the enterprise, whatever that is, and even very narrowly defined, and you've heard me say this before, whether it's work we're doing today, work we wish we could get to, or work we haven't even necessarily thought of yet, but get some valuable work done in a world where it requires that non-determinism, that the ability to sort of make some decisions, potentially use some tools. I think we're there. We have in production solutions that are delivering valuable work with companies all over the place. They tend to be very narrow and they need a lot of monitoring, but we're starting. Yes, and I agree, but I agree with the decade concept because I think this is going to continue to expand as we go. I think his, unsurprisingly, given how smart Karpathy is, I think his expectations or hopes for what an agent is are really big.
Well, I felt like he was trying to. I felt like his perspective was as like an AI scientist. He was in his mind. The model is the LLM is the agent, and was going through all the problems with that. And so I thought, oh yeah. But in the meanwhile, I don't think he was saying, oh, these are not useful or anything like that. I think what he was saying is there's all these gaps to make it truly useful as like an employee you would hire to do a job. And I think that's interesting to me because I think it highlights the difference between where we see a lot of enterprise customers potentially and where things are in the real world. So what I would say is, and he even talks about this, it's sort of funny. He talks about demos. He goes, I don't trust any demo. I had the best demo of the Waymo self-driving you've ever seen in 2014. And, it sort of still doesn't work because there's all these like, he talks about the nines you have to get to for these really high risk sort of use cases. And I think what's happened is what I see happen in the enterprise is you see they see these demos and they look amazing. They look awesome, but they're sort of like the Waymo driving demo he had in 2014. And there's all these gaps and all this work that needs to be done to make agents useful. And in his mind, that needs to be done in LLM. And in our world, to get payback today, you have to close those gaps. And that's where a lot of the work, there's sort of this gap between the easy demo and, productive agent land. And that's a lot of what we're helping folks do.
But it's not a demo when your Tesla takes over and takes the next hour of the interstate for you. That is valuable work, if you will, that it's getting done. It may not get you in the complete drive, and that's sort of where we are with agents. It's a shades of gray discussion, not a black and white discussion. Oh, this thing didn't get me all the way to Chicago without any intervention.
Yeah. Well, clearly, when he talked about when they started with OpenAI and the definition of, what agents do, it was, this thing it is a person effectively in terms of its abilities to do knowledge work, right? In fact, he was even broader than that at the beginning. It's like we reduce it to knowledge work. Before that, it was just like any work,
right? Physical or not.
That vision is I can imagine needing a decade to get to a vision that includes all that kind of work. And meanwhile, and he acknowledges there's vast parts of the economy that can be transformed. Even if you take the models that are there today, you can clearly have huge economic impact without new model improvements.
Mike, we lost you there for a minute, but we'd love to get your.
I was
you
just
missed all my words of wisdom, by the way, while you were away.
Right. I'll be sure and catch it all. But it seems like the ROI that we are finding on use cases in enterprise is not at all dependent on the kinds of things that Karpathy is talking about, right? So it's really, if we take if the models froze, if we had nothing but the models we have right now, if they developed no further, and all we had to do was engineer around those to build out these use cases where we automate away either part of the work that people do or all of the job that some people do, we would be fine. We would be creating dynamic enterprise level changes throughout, many, many industries.
And we could spend a decade doing that.
Yeah. And in fact, This is an even more salient point that Karpathy didn't touch on at all, but the idea of accessing your dark data using embeddings, right? The RAG technique that's out there, that the fundamentals of that are terrible. The RAG technique itself, the RAG embeddings models are awful. They don't do
Yeah.
at all what you would expect that they would do. They have all sorts of mismatches, but you engineer above them and you get miraculous results, right? I'm going to lean into this as being what business has always done. Language models are today, let's admit it, they're kind of like horses, right? They have all this weird treatment that you have to do. You have to take care of them in certain ways, but they only handle certain loads. You have to know how to use them. Would a business be better off with or without a horse? Now, later on, we may have an engine, but does that mean we wait for engines to come along? No, we use the horses. We ride the horse we have now, literally, move things forward. And then when there is a cleaner, safer, faster, better, smaller, cheaper, we'll take advantage of that as it comes. But you don't wait until then. You'll be out of business. So jump on the bandwagon, use the tech that's there now, implement it, get the ROI that's there now, and get the more ROI later.
We've crossed a new threshold here in analogies with language models as horses and bandwagons and all of that sort of rolled into one, but I pretty much agree with you.
So Jim, how are you advising enterprises to, all right, so yes, it's going to be a while to do the work required to get to extract the value here, but how are you sort of advising folks how to get started? How should they prioritize what they should be going after?
I know we've talked about this before, but it sort of bears worth repeating. This is about starting narrow and identifying use cases that sort of fit the capabilities of the moment. And there are common characteristics where the sort of non-determinism and decision-making capability of an LLM today, as narrow as it is, and with the right guardrails around it, can get valuable work done. Whether that's as simple as extracting structured data from documents. We had a conversation today about claims ingestion. That has material value to the company. It's very narrow. It doesn't sort of address the entire claims adjudication business process. It doesn't replace the claims adjudication analyst, but just getting that off the PDF and into a structured database, and sort of being able to highlight where we think we got it 100%, and the language model can tell us its confidence level in what just happened. That has substantial business value. Once we get that, now let's talk about widening the use case. There are use cases all over the enterprise that represent starting points, and that's the discussion. The other side of this is, and there are characters. I mean, we've talked about the idea of a spotter's guide. Where there's data and you're sort of making decisions based on gut, or where you make the same decision over and over again. You're faced with the same decision over and over again. Those are characteristics of places to pull up the hood in the enterprise and take a look, but it starts with the business. And then you ask the question, okay, what's the best and right tooling this moment? And acknowledge that 3, 4, 6 months from now, that may not be the best and right tooling anymore, or you may have found a way to do it less expensively than we can do it today, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable to get started. Getting started is I mean, I think Alon or one of you made the point a moment ago, just starting that process and making it regular cadence in your thinking is part of this journey, so that you'll be where you want to be 3, 5, 10 years from now.
And I was going to say, building in a modular way like that, building what works now and then what comes later, is precisely what you need to do to avoid being locked into any one model provider's sort of full tech stack, right? So you want to apply the models that fit from a cost, performance, and intelligence capability today in the environments where they fit, and then later you'll add the larger ones or the bigger ones doing different jobs, and being able to do that over time and as well as non-monolithically within your organization, right? Not making it always dependent on the same thing is what's going to ultimately lead you to be able to move around between vendors, to move around between tech stacks. That's going to keep you able to take advantage of the performance and cost and reliability improvements that come along.
This is counter to organizational decision making today, by the way. They want to make a decision, pick something, go with it, and it's done.
It's not the time for that.
Yeah.
It's a mess.
Well, just to kind of Mike's point, I think it's interesting. Like if you look at the evolution of the labs in the space, and OpenAI specifically, and Anthropic, I guess, is two of the bigger ones. They're going down this path where they're adding more and more scaffolding on top of their models, right? And there's good and bad in that. So if you buy into one of the vendors, and for example, OpenAI is making a strong push for, here is a series of not just APIs, but also SDKs and kind of higher order layers that you can use to be productive and get things working in an integrated fashion. I think there's a lot of merit to that, and you have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of locking into a vendor versus being completely open. It's easy to say, let's just be generic, but you're giving up productivity. And so I think it'll be interesting to watch the space and see how it evolves between the sort of the engineers who are building the stuff and the folks who want it fast but then want it flexible. So I know from my recent experiences, it's becoming more and more attractive to lean into SDKs that are being provided to you as opposed to less, as those SDKs mature and exploit functionality that otherwise you would have to write for yourself.
Can you dig into that a little bit? Like, give us a little more color on what kinds of things you're seeing.
I mean, if you look, so very specifically, OpenAI with ChatKit and the Agent SDK, right, allow you to build very quickly a end-to-end chat experience with an agentic framework on the back end and a kind of a user interface that supports widgets on the front end. And so you could be up and running in a matter of a day with something that would have taken longer if you're wrestling with, how do I stream the responses appropriately? How do I let the user see history of a conversation versus starting a new conversation with repeating? How do I draw user interface widgets in my chat box? Those are all things that take engineering time to get right, that you can sort of adapt. And Mike and I are working on projects that use those components, and we have decisions to make, like how much do we lean in versus not. And I think if you're building a broad platform, you have to be careful about selecting a vendor because you want to choose stuff. But if you're building an application, I'm down at the level of, I'm an IT department, or I'm building an enterprise application for my specific need. The trade-off becomes much murkier as to, like, oh, should I build it in a really flexible way where in the future I'll be able to plug anybody's thing in, or do I pick a provider that I'm gonna get their best take at this and ride their coattails in terms of improvements to both their model and their SDK.
This most recent Dev Day that OpenAI sponsored, basically they announced all their things that they've done lately. It was kind of a Steve Jobs moment. It was kind of hey, here's an entire ecosystem. It does everything you need. Why are you bothering with all these other things, right? And it was pretty darn effective at at conveying that. Now, the thing is, enterprises have been burned by, over the last 3 years or so, these generations of APIs that have come along. And if you just use this one to go out, out the path that we're on, then you're stuck there, and then they've gotten isolated on those. And so there's a little bit of once bit, twice shy in that regard. But I think it's strong enough now, especially this most recent Dev Day stuff, and then some of the agents, some of the coding agents that are being produced by guys like Anthropic. Those things are strong enough standalone things that you're probably not tempted to go build it yourself, and you probably are more inclined to just take advantage of what's already there and join that ecosystem. So it'll be curious to see how it does evolve.
Based on what you guys are seeing, for the sort of the business person maybe listening in, right? They're an executive of a large company. What are the use cases you would sort of guide them? These are low-hanging fruit you should be looking at now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key areas that to me are really effective, like without being too generic, I think the areas that I would look at is things to do with customer interaction points, right? Wherever your customers are, however you serve them today, they're going to a website, they're going to a mobile app, they're calling you on the phone, they're exchanging emails, right? All those touch points, I would look at those and say, okay, how can we respond faster with higher quality to our customers' needs? I would start there, because I think AI can facilitate some percent of that interaction and improve it. I think that then you can look at other areas like training, right? AI is actually quite good at helping someone go from, call it level 1 to level 2, level 3 on any given skill set. If you have the right corpus, if you have if you've put together the right materials, AI can personalize that. And this was another one of Karpathy's, sort of passions here around teaching. I think it's one thing to teach someone, a brand new skill set. It's a whole other thing just to teach you, how does our company operate in this situation, right? It is not, oh, I'm fundamentally trying to, to learn a new language. It's just sort of like the branding, right? How do we operate? So I think those kinds of areas are ripe for improvement. I think everything that has to do with sort of the sales funnel. So I talk about customer interaction, but before someone is a customer of yours, right? You're marketing to them, you're prospecting, you're trying to understand, depending on what solutions or products you offer. I think that there's a tremendous area there where in the sales pipeline, AI can be very helpful in terms of lead generation and prospecting.
I was just saying, I was part of a consortium back around the time that deep learning was created, a part of a consortium out based in California that Numenta sponsored. And the whole point of that consortium was to come together and share AI progress, right? So lots of really big companies investing millions of dollars were coming together and showing their latest stuff. This is what I tried. This is what it did. And what was really funny was we used to joke that as soon as any of it worked, nobody would show up, right? So it was really only a place where you're going to bring things that were broken, right? And we used to talk about the Kitty Hawk moment, right? Everybody knew that between our ears there's a thing that's intelligent. So we see birds flying, and that was inspiration for airplanes. There's a thing between our ears that's inspiration for a machine that's able to do this. So we all thought, man, this, when it happens, it's still going to take a decade for this thing to get off the ground, or 20 years or even longer. Some people used to say it was going to take a war for AI to really get good. But we sort of recognized fully that what was really happening was that we were sharing all of our ideas because they were failing. So then you hear guys like Karpathy saying, look at all these terrible examples of things that are failing. I am unable to do all these things that are failing. Well, what about all the people that are not failing? Like all the firms out there using AI to do quantitative analysis, right? That's kind of one giant category. All the sort of the silent projects that are working, that where folks are holding back what they're doing and how it works because they don't want to share with their competitors and talk about the art of the possible. They'd rather use that stealth technique to get ahead. I think that's a lot of what's missing here. In the press recently, if you pay attention to what's going on at the foundation level of how models are being built in data centers and fundraising, all that in the AI world, we've stopped talking about AI being measured in flops, right? We used to have flops, which is floating point operations per second. Who knows what that is, right? We're measuring AI in watts now, right? And so think about that for a second. AI is equivalent to power. It's in the outlet on the wall that you go plug into. All we have to do is make the right appliances that use that power. The home appliances are already there. People are using that at home all the time. It's very obvious. Enterprise needs bigger machines, right? Needs more modular stuff, needs industrial stuff, right? We got to make those things using that AI that's on tap. We've got to use it. We got to make it in a way that has competitive advantages for the specific environment that we're in. And I think there's just a lot of silence about things that are really working because the technology is fundamentally capable. And we're going to continue to see this pattern. People are going to hold back with the stuff that is working really well, and we're going to read about all the failures.
Hey, Pete, I mean, to your question about recommendations of places to start, we talk about this stuff all the time. This is what we do. The people on this call, we're listening to podcasts. Well, heck, everybody here sort of spent 2.5 hours or 3 hours listening to another Karpathy video. Even if you tried to 2x it, which is sort of like
speed. You listen to the whole thing at 1x?
Well,
Crazy.
he's
Andre
listening
talks to 2x natural.
Exactly, because that's doubling it takes it to 4x. I'm not even sure I didn't need to slow that one down and re-listen to it. There's a 0.75 or 0.6. But we're there, and we think about this all the time. It's amazing to walk into the companies that we get to work with as a result of this, and where they are on the maturity curve, and some of them are so early. And the idea of introducing to them a point where, and this is maybe alone a little bit of a contrarian view to what you just described, but introducing as their first out of the box place to start something that intersects with their customer is really frightening to them. So in those scenarios, I will try to steer to opportunities or use cases or places to start that feel much safer in terms of, hey, if it doesn't work out or if it doesn't fail or, this doesn't really change someone's job and this is internal and you can see what's going on and it's a place to sort of grow your skills and start.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the most obvious stuff right now is anywhere you've got developers, they should clearly be using AI in a very meaningful way, right? That's just a productivity boost with not a whole lot of downside if you do it right, and and you could easily see whether you're doing it right or wrong along the way. It's like for me, I'd say in the last 3 months, probably is the transition sort of like from, yeah, it's good. You can kind of iterate with AI assistant, talk back and forth, workshop some ideas, have it build some functions, then you put them together. And you're kind of like it's a co-partner kind of, let's say, tool. In the last 3 months with I'd say improvement to Claude Code and Codex, which to me has actually taken a lot of mind share now. But the Codex agent specifically, it's crazy. Like, so now if I've got an idea, I'm like, okay, I need a overnight feature. Like every night I'm like, okay, what feature do I want the agent to work on overnight? And kind of brainstorm something and spend 15, 20 minutes trying to come up with a decent spec or something, and then just fire it off. And I'm shocked at how often it's able to build, let's call it a feature which needs to write, a few thousand line of code, touch, a dozen files. You wake up in the morning, you're like, holy crap, here's a thing that actually didn't exist except, conceptually, like in my brain, it was like this conceptual thing. And you wake up and there it is. And it's like, okay, now I need some polish and maybe need some testing, but you could show it to someone and they understand now the idea that was just in your head is suddenly, touchable in the real world, digitally at least. So I think that's the missed opportunity. Like if you're not thinking that way, like what's a thing that it could do for me? You're giving up a lot of capacity to produce stuff.
And I know from experience that a lot of enterprises are going to say, "Oh yeah, but not in my code base. It can't handle that." We've built our stuff up over years. I've got these 20 people that really know this nonsense, right? The code is a native modality for the language model because there is so much of it online, right? It speaks code as well as it speaks English, and we've been using it to finish our sentences for 3 years now, right? So it's definitely a great example of an area that enterprises need to get moving on quickly. And if they're not doing it now, they need to get help to do that faster.
Yeah, and even if you're an enterprise with a large code base, it doesn't mean you're not trying to build something new right from scratch, experiment with something or to follow a new initiative, right? It's not everything is in legacy code bases. I would say it's fascinating to see. So one of the modes that all these agents are now able to operate in is sort of the code review mode, which is write stuff, but separately another agent runs and checks and provides feedback on like a developer would, of like, hey, this doesn't look right. You said to do this, but the code actually implemented that. And so it's just amazing the kind of subtle things that code reviews that agents are able to do find that would take a lot of energy for a human developer to find those kinds of things. Like if you imagine thousands of line of codes being written, like you'd fall behind just to get human reviewers of those 1,000 line of code. You'd be the bottleneck instantly.
Yes.
Code review is a critical component that I think now enables this sort of, build prototypes, build features much more quickly with confidence that what you're checking in actually does a really nice job. So, again, it's not all free. That there's energy that has to be put in to get the stuff built out, but the multiplier of the energy you put in versus what you're getting out, to me, is 10x what it was just months ago.
Yeah, and the proof is in whether it survives contact with the real world, right? Use another one of these Karpathy phrases, because when it writes code and it reviews it and it puts it in the source code repo, you can actually test it. You can do your normal classic processes to make sure it's good, and you're very quickly, as Alon was saying, you're going to want to have the AI start to do more of the testing because there's just so much new stuff that you can test against. But it's verifiable. The same way when we write enterprise reports that are not hallucinated because they're based on fact and we have the fact checking capabilities and the references and the links, it's the same with the code, right? The code may be generated by a machine. You may be worried that, it's going to code something wrong, but there's a catch for that. There's a way of making sure that it didn't. There are humans in that loop. And ultimately, if it does the right job, then it's ready to release, right? It doesn't matter who created the code.
One, and I know we're sort of running low on time, but let me throw this one last sort of question or comment to you guys. In probably 2 meetings at least this week, where I'm talking to a business person, and they sort of had the equivalent of the Waymo demo, right? So like, hey, this stuff's really easy. Like, what do I need you for, sort of thing? Like, help me. And some of them sincerely are saying, help me articulate your value proposition to the rest of my team, because they're like in ChatGPT and it looks really easy. Like, what do we need this big project for? To me, it relates to a lot of the gaps that Andrej was sort of pointing out that exist between, where LLMs are today and getting real work done. Maybe give like your top 2 or 3 things that are 3 or 4 things that would help a business person understand and articulate sort of that gap that needs to be closed to achieve real value.
Yeah, look, it's prompts, all prompts at the bottom, right? So the way I get the question asked to me is basically, hey, are you guys just doing prompts, right? So just doing prompts, meaning the same thing I do when I go to ChatGPT. Well,
Yeah.
On one hand, yes, at the bottom of all of this, there's a language model, and something goes into that model and it does a job. But on the other extreme, a piano is just keys, right? And so aren't all piano players just pressing keys? The fact is you can get really good at pressing the right keys using that machine at a different level of abstractions. So it is all prompts, but the way that you assemble those prompts in a way that's repeatable, in a way that's testable, the way that you make it future proof so that you can expand on it, the way you apply the right model at the right time, right? That's all the depth that you're after. And you could say, well, yeah, but doesn't the AI do all of that because AI solves AI problems?
Right.
It very well may in a 5-year time frame, but not in a commercially interesting time frame because things are happening so fast right now. So the role that we can bring at a minimum is to communicate what's the best methodologies for taking on this technology right away. Another level up, we can bring some of our skills to actually implementing those methodologies in your organization. Another level up from that is we can bring some of our actual tech assets and pull those in. And ultimately, what we're really helping to do is what good technologists have done all along, which is pointing you in the right direction and bringing the future closer to your business. That's what we do now. That's what we'll continue doing.
Shocked you use piano instead of accordion. I would have thought that would be more up your alley.
I did have Sora. I have Sora showing me playing the accordion with a group of raving fans, by the way. So, I felt good about that.
A language model inherently knows nothing about your business except what it was originally trained on the internet. That's sort of it. And we talk about this sort of employee analogy all the time. A new employee walking in the door knows nothing about your business at that point. They may be the smartest guy you've ever met, smartest gal you've ever hired, but they don't know anything about it. And they're not going, beyond sort of generic tasks. They don't know how you want to run your business. They can't deal with the fact that, hey, a customer just called and said, what is your policy? How do you think about it if you short deliver a customer, or if there's an issue out there, or sort of what's your strategy related to how you think about growing a market or optimizing? Are you optimizing for revenue growth? Are you optimizing for margin growth? And that changes over time. The model inherently knows nothing about that. Bringing that to life with the model is that last mile, and doing it in a way that it doesn't wander off, or if it is wandering off, we know it as immediately and can sort of correct for its behavior.
Jim, to your point there, I think that last part of going live is one thing, keeping it on the rails, managing it, going, that's really what you should be asking, right? Because just to go live doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you can't run it over, you need to run it for months, years, right? Like pick the time frame that you want to be successful over. So that takes care and feeding. That takes knowledge, right? And so building the systems, like I could go and have a conversation with ChatGPT, and then I could start that same conversation tomorrow, and it will relearn the we taught it yesterday. But what I really want is something that understands the business practices, applies the best solution, is integrated and connected with the rest of my system, whether that's the user interface, the knowledge bases, the databases, right? Those are all the enterprise engineering practices that have to come to play as you deploy these kinds of systems.
I just going to say that the models as shipped by the providers are by definition the bar. they are the average, right? That's the starting point. You have to make them better than what they ship with. Otherwise, you're not even in the competitive playing field along with everybody else. So what you get from the model provider is just the beginning, and we've just got to keep remembering that as how we differentiate.
I think Alon just hit on a colossal point that probably merits its own
Huge.
podcast. Huge, which is keeping a generative AI powered solution, whether we're talking about agents or applications or whatever, keeping that on the rails and doing what it's supposed to be doing is a function that requires 3 different skill sets. It requires some IT skills. It requires some deep functional knowledge about what it's supposed to be doing. It requires AI knowledge. And you got to bring all those skills together. And who owns that organizationally and who's on the hook for making that happen is very different than the way traditional deterministic software is supported and run in an enterprise. And if you're not ready to take that on as an organization and think about that organizational responsibility and the investment associated with it, there's huge ROI that's out there, but there is investment beyond just sort of what you pay to chat, what you pay in your enterprise license here or there. It is a different thing that needs to be supervised and supported. Probably merits its own discussion, but I think companies sort of need to at least recognize and understand that and be ready for sort of an organizational change for supervising that digital employee, even if that digital employee has a very narrow task.
So Alon, I'm gonna throw you a question. You can bring us home on this. I'm a senior executive at a company, and they've heard about the AI bubble, and they got word of this video from Andrej that says, yeah, this is a 10-year journey, and they're like, I guess I can wait a while. What's your advice to them?
Sure. Wait for a while and see how that works out for you. I think that's potentially the best way to go out of business is just ignore what's going on around you and assume nothing is changing. I mean, look, the reality is some businesses will last fine without AI because they have whatever advantages they have. I think for the average business in a competitive landscape, you have to think about what's the competition doing? How am I going to beat the competition? And that probably involves using the best available tools to do the job. So as we pointed earlier, those tools are changing. And if you keep waiting for those tools to settle down, you'll be waiting a long time. So be thoughtful about where to start. Use some expertise if you don't have it in-house, but get started and then stake your ambition at the appropriate level so you can get some wins and understand, okay, here's where the wins are coming from. And then you can get more ambitious as you go through that journey.
Awesome. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Good to see you guys. See you next time.